Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Lisa Harris, the Specialist for Foreign Languages with the Virginia Department of Education. And we do welcome you to this workshop on meeting the needs of diverse learners, supporting foreign language learning for students with disabilities. We are going to start out with some quick introductions because we want you to know not just who we are, but we also want to know who you are. And so we're going to start out with just a brief introduction. And so if in your rooms, if you would just take 1 minute, and we're going to ask the facilitator to record a summary of the information for us. What we'd like to know is, have you introduced yourself by name, the role that you play at your school or in your school division, whether you are a classroom teacher, a language teacher, a special education teacher, counselor, administrator, and if you are a language teacher, the language that you teach. So if you'll just take a moment, introduce yourself to the room. Facilitators, if you will collect up a summary and let us know in the chat box how many language teachers you have, how many special education teachers, how many counselors, administrators, or any other role that's present in the room with you. So if you'll take a moment and do that, we'll do introductions here, and then we'll come back and introduce our colleagues to everyone.
I'm Teresa Lee, and I'm
Okay, well, thank you for the introductions. I'd now like to introduce to you my colleagues from another department of the Virginia Department of Education.
Good evening. My name is Teresa Lee, and I'm the specialist for students with specific learning disabilities and other health impairment. I focus in on students with learning disabilities and attention deficit.
Hi, my name is Kim Bowson-Brown, and I am the Dyslexia and Specialized Reading Specialist.
And we are really excited to see a variety of folk who are participating today. Our goals for this workshop is to provide a common understanding of the definitions, laws, and regulations governing students with disabilities, to provide a forum for communication between special education and foreign language personnel regarding their division's policies and procedures for support of students with disabilities in the foreign language classroom. In terms of our agenda today, we're going to look at a brief overview of special education, so discussion of special education policies and procedures. We're going to do a discussion of strategies, accommodations, and instructional practices that will increase access for students with disabilities to the general curriculum. And then we will provide you guys with an overview of a new document developed by Virginia Department of Education addressing foreign language and students with disabilities and upcoming professional development activities. The first thing that we would like to share with you is the trends in diploma types for students with disabilities. One of our goals with what we're doing with special education is that we want more students graduating from high school, students with disabilities, graduating from high school with a standard or advanced diploma. Currently, we have about 15% of our students with disabilities who are graduating with an advanced diploma. Obviously, in order to get an advanced diploma, foreign language is a requirement. Our other students who are graduating, about 45%, 48% are graduating with a standard diploma. We want to increase the number of advanced diploma types.
So in order to get that advanced studies diploma, of course, we know that we need 3 years of a foreign language, or 2 years of one language and 2 years of another. So here's a question that I have for you, and this is your first point of discussion amongst yourselves. Can a student with disabilities get a waiver from the foreign language requirement for the advanced studies diploma? We're going to take about 30 seconds and just yes or no, what does your group think? Can you get that waiver? Starting to get some answers coming in. I've got some mixed responses here from our group on site. It looks like we're also getting some mixed responses from the host sites that are out in the other areas as well. And so the answer to your question doesn't necessarily have a really straightforward response, but the short answer is no. You cannot get a waiver for the advanced studies diploma. Foreign languages are a diploma requirement at this time for the advanced studies diploma. They are not a graduation requirement. Because you can graduate with a different type of diploma without, as you said, having a foreign language requirement, our standard diploma, there is at this time no mechanism for giving a waiver for the foreign language requirement. There are some other options that we can consider for students who might have difficulty meeting that requirement due to certain specific circumstances. For example, the military compact allows us to address the needs of children who transfer into schools late in their career because of a military redeployment. We also have options for local school divisions to give credit for the language earned outside of the traditional 140 clock hour of the classroom. And then there are some other processes that we look at, but in general circumstances, the answer to that question is no, there's no waiver for that requirement. So if there's no waiver for the requirement, we do know then that with just the 2 diplomas, as that change was made recently, and perhaps some other changes that may come, we do have to make sure that we make the diploma accessible to students with disabilities. So here's your first activity. Together we're going to have a quick discussion on the following questions. Do you have, or have you had in the past, students with disabilities in your classrooms? What do you see as some barriers to student access and success in the language classrooms based on your experiences? And what have you done to address those barriers? So the 3 questions are up on the screen. We're going to take about 3 minutes, so about a minute per question maybe, to process. In your groups, process together. We're going to ask the facilitators to type in some of the responses that you generate, and we're going to come back together in 3 minutes to discuss the answers. So please have your group discussions on site. So we're going to bring everybody back together. And we've seen a lot of discussion coming through the chat box. Have you had a chance to read there? We've had some discussions here about some of the barriers to access and getting enrolled in the class, as well as some of the primary challenges that have been seen in the classrooms up to this point. So let's see if you came up with any of the same types of barriers that we found when we brought together a group of stakeholders. And it was just about a year ago. We had a group get together and we discussed this question. What are some of the barriers both to access and success for students with disabilities in the foreign language classroom? And these are some of the things that we came up with. See if you found any of the similar ones. So the first one that we found was a lack of pre-service teacher training in this area. Teachers coming into the classroom weren't equipped to be able to provide the necessary accommodations or the other things that we needed to do to meet the needs of the students with disabilities in the classroom. Another thing that we found were some disparities in the advising and scheduling practices that take place at the schools, that counselors were not placing students into these classes either because of a perceived notion that they would not be successful in the class, or because they've been placed on a different track that did not require foreign language, and so they were counseled away from those sessions. Another area that we found were some of the attitudes of the stakeholders that, again, part of the reason those barriers were put up, that students could not be successful in the language classroom if they had certain disabilities. And then finally, some of the instructional practices that limited students being able to demonstrate their success in the classroom. So I think this matched some of the things I was seeing coming up. I think there were probably some others that we did not find from the stakeholder group. Did you see anything else additional jump out at you coming across the screen?
I think one of the things that I'm seeing, you guys are talking about the size and the pace of the curriculum, the size of the class and the pace of the curriculum seems to be something that I've seen several times as it's popping up. Some of you noted some of the strategies and instructional approaches in your classroom. So I think those are barriers, and these are some of the barriers that we also saw from the group, the stakeholder group. And our stakeholder group was a mixture of teachers of foreign language as well as special education teachers, parents, and community partners. So we brought in a pretty diverse group of people to talk about this.
And after we took a look at what some of these barriers were and some of the reasons why students were not either being enrolled in classes or being successful, we decided that we needed to do something about it. And so the first thing we wanted to do was start to have a common understanding of what special education, specially designed instruction looks like in the foreign language classroom. And that's part of what we're going to do this evening. And so Teresa is now going to take over, and we're going to do a little talk about the background of special education.
First of all, in relationship to special education, we understand that most of our teachers of foreign language do not and are not required to have training in special education. So today we're going to give you a kind of quick overview, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with some of the things that I'm going to talk about. First of all, we must recognize the Individual with Disabilities Educational Act. Special education students must meet federal and state guidelines for identification, so there's an eligibility process. There are 13 disability categories, and in Virginia we have an additional one because hearing impairment and deaf are separate in Virginia versus nationally. In relationship to eligibility for special education, students can be found eligible for special education from the age of 2 to 22 in Virginia and are entitled, so this is an entitlement, they are entitled to special education at no cost to their parents to meet their unique needs. In order to, for a student with disability, they are required to have an individual educational program for services. In relationship to what is special education is defined as specially designed instruction, again at no cost to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. What is specially designed instruction? There are 3 components of special education. Specially designed instruction, accommodations and modifications, and related services. So in terms of specially designed instruction, this is what does the teacher do in the classroom to address their needs. And it's about adapting the content, the methodology, or delivery of instruction to ensure that the students have access to the general curriculum and that their unique needs are being met. Again, we're talking about access and meeting their needs. Recapping, special education is 3 components: specially designed instruction, accommodations and modifications, and related services. In terms of what is an individual educational program, what is that? All students with disabilities must have an individual educational program. That is a document that describes the educational program that has been designed to meet that child's unique needs. It is a document that is designed for one student and must be truly individualized. It creates an opportunity for parents and school administrators and related service personnel to come together to design a program to improve the educational results of a student with disabilities. This document, this individual education program, and you've probably seen the abbreviation IEP, is a legally binding document. When we write an IEP, we have to implement that IEP as designed. That IEP is not implemented as designed, then that's where the complaint, due process, and mediation processes kick in. The schools must ensure that these IEPs are available for all students, teachers, and service providers, and that who are responsible for the implementation. So as a foreign language teacher, you should have access to the student's individual educational program. And that access can be in the forms of actually a copy of the IEP. Again, this is confidential information, so if you have a copy, you're responsible for keeping it confidential. However, in most cases, it's going to the student's file, pulling his IEP, or the special ed case manager sharing that information with you. So one of the major concerns that we see when we talk about IEPs is that please don't tell parents that you didn't know Johnny has an IEP. That's a discussion that you and the special ed teacher should be having when Johnny is in your classroom. Not knowing is not a way to avoid a complaint or due process. You have access. In terms of who develops an IEP, typically the IEP team should be one or both of the parents, the students, and especially at the high school, and 14 years old or older students are required to participate in their IEP because we are going to be developing transitional goals and activities. One of the students' special ed teachers, one or more regular ed teachers, and that could be you as a foreign language teacher if that is one of the classes that he will be participating in. A representative of the LEA, this is normally the administrator of special ed. It could be an assistant principal, it could be a coordinator, it could be a department chair, and other folk as appropriate. The parents may want to bring other folk. We may want to have an outside provider there, so those kind of folk can be included in the IEP team. In relationship to the major components of the IEP, the first thing in the IEP that you will see is a present level of academic achievement and functional performance. That is a description of the student. This present level performance is going to be based on data. It's going to be based on teacher observation. There must be input from the parents in that present level performance. Based on that present level performance, you are going to develop measurable goals, annual goals. Students with disabilities must have standard-based IEP goals. That is a requirement, so they must be tied to the state standards. Not all of them. There are students that have functional goals. There are students that may need behavioral goals, but some of the goals must be tied to the standards. In terms of benchmarks and short-term objectives, those are only required as needed. And for students who are taking the alternate assessment, and more lower functioning students, most of them will have objectives. In terms of another component, we must identify the special education, the related services, and any supplementary aids and services. That means the accommodations and related services. We also must describe how the student will participate with children without disabilities. This is about them having access to the general curriculum and participating with their non-disabled peers. We must define how they will participate in the state accountability and division accountability system. In other words, how will they participate in the state assessments? We must also include the duration, the frequency, and the location of the service. How much service, when will they receive those services, and where will they receive those services? We are also required to have a progress report. As often as a general ed student gets a progress report, students with special education must also have a progress report. If they are 14 years old, we are going to look at their initial transition plan. So we're going to look at what does the student want to do when he graduates from high school or when he moves into the community. And then we must define a secondary transition plan with activities as they, to prepare them for that ultimate goal.
That was a lot of information packed into that one slide there, and I do see some questions coming up in the chat box. I do want to answer just this one easy one very quickly. Somebody is asking what LEA stands for, and we are a profession that is just rank with acronyms. And I do apologize that we put one in there without explaining it first, but LEA stands for Local Education Agency. It's just the official way of referring to the school division. You're the locality, the local education agency.
Are there other questions? In terms of, as I said earlier, special education has 3 components: specially designed instruction, and most often in the foreign language classroom, you are going to be addressing the accommodations and modifications. And why are accommodations and modifications important? Accommodation is a change that helps the student to minimize the impact of the disability. It does not necessarily change the content itself. So an accommodation would be something like a read aloud accommodation. So this is giving them access to that curriculum to minimize the impact of the disability. The student has a reading disability, and it's a phonological base. Decoding is really weak. The student may be eligible for a read aloud accommodation. A modification is where we're actually changing what is being taught and expected in the curriculum. In other words, it may be an off-grade level, 2 or 3 grade levels below. It may be the aligned standards of learning. So again, modification is actually changing the content itself. Special education requires that supplementary aids and services be provided that allow them access. So graphic organizers and read aloud and speech to text, these are the kinds of accommodations that you might see for a student within your foreign language class. The purpose in these aids and services is not to give students an advantage. It is to give them access. And aids and services are based on the individual needs of students. So you may have one student in your class that may need to read aloud. However, you may have another student that may need extended time. So it's an individually designed program, and the aid should be based on the needs of those individual students.
And I do see we have another question coming up in regards to accommodations and the transference of them between classrooms. And I think the question is asking why some accommodations are not required in the foreign language classroom when they have them in other classrooms.
Foreign language classrooms are not exempt from implementing the accommodations on the IEP. So if they are having an accommodation in their English class, those accommodations apply to the foreign language classroom also. So we do not base accommodations for the most part on the individual class, but there are some generic accommodations that would be used in all classes.
Are there times when accommodations would be listed for just certain subject areas, and might that be a reason why it's not transferring to the foreign language classroom?
That is exactly right. There are some accommodations that we may say, obviously a calculator, that's for math class, so that may not transfer. But there are some accommodations that I may specify specifically for a specific class. However, if there are general accommodations and they are in a foreign language class, those accommodations, if appropriate, would apply to that foreign language classroom. Okay. Other questions? And that is one of the things we are trying to get over to teachers, even to our gifted ed teachers. It doesn't matter what the class is. That does not determine whether we implement the accommodations. There's no exceptions. If they have accommodations, they need to be implemented in those classrooms. In relationship to accommodations in general, if you're familiar with our assessment document, you will find that basically there are 4 categories of accommodations that we look at in terms of providing a free and appropriate public education, providing FAPE for our students, giving them access. And those include presentations, so you could do repeated directions, a read aloud accommodation. We also look at response. They could mark their answers in their book. They could dictate to a scribe. We look at setting. They could have a separate corner over so that they're not easily distracted. They could go to a separate classroom to take that test. We look at timing. We could give them extended time. We could give them frequent breaks. So again, it's based on the needs of individual students.
Before we transition out of this section, I see we have a few other questions in the chat box. Can you scroll up and make sure we didn't miss any going in here? The one I see that's showing on our screen at the moment is, does this apply for middle school as well?
Yes.
Easy answer to that one. What else are we seeing on there?
You're asking about, is read aloud the same as audio recording?
Yes.
Okay, so the question was, is read aloud the same as an audio recording? See any others that we did not get to?
Just a thought. Is there a designated person who's supposed to do read alouds? Case manager or teacher?
In relationship to who is supposed to implement the accommodations such as a read aloud. Our regulations give general ed teachers the right to implement specially designed instruction in collaboration with the special education teacher. So that read aloud accommodation, and especially if you're reading it in a language, obviously it's going to be very difficult for a special ed teacher who has not been trained in that language to do that read aloud. However, you, the special ed teacher and the general ed, the foreign language teacher, should work together to determine how that's going to be provided. In terms of any of the regulations say anyone can provide those accommodations. Okay. Allowed, you may want to tape it in advance and they can put headphones on and listen to it if it's something that needs to be read aloud. Or you could use text-to-speech software to be able to provide that read aloud accommodation.
And so we get into the part of why do we want to discuss this foreign language component of the IEP at all. And so we're going to transition into connecting the pieces of the document. And I'm going to ask a few moderator questions while we do this section so we can come back and include any there as well. So obviously, as Teresa said, we're going to discuss the importance of the IEP in a foreign language classroom because students need foreign languages to meet certain post-secondary goals if they are on the Advanced Studies Diploma track at this time. Or it might just be that they have other goals that involve learning a foreign language, and we want to make sure that that is accessible to all students. Our current diploma requirements, and I do want to stress that these are our current requirements for graduation. This is something that's currently under review in the state of Virginia. But right now we have two different types of diploma. And foreign language requirements that might impact students for the next several graduating classes include the requirements of Advanced Studies Diploma that they have 3 years of one foreign language or 2 years of one language and 2 years in another. And as we discussed, that is not generally a requirement that can be waived. In the standard diploma, there is an option that allows you not to take a foreign language because you need a 2-year consecutive credit of electives, which can be satisfied by a foreign language 2-year program or a fine arts or a career and technical education series of programs. So there is a way that you do not need foreign language for the standards diploma, but not for the advanced studies diploma. Okay? So we want to go about supporting foreign language learning for students with disabilities. And in order to do that, we really need to make sure that we have a good grounding of our expectations in the foreign language classroom. First of all, we have to come to some agreements. And one of those agreements is that foreign languages really are for everyone, that they are not just for specific students or students with certain skills that they come with, but foreign languages can be for any and all students who have an interest and desire and a need for them in their curricular or their life goals. We also should agree that all students can benefit from learning a second language, that there are many, many studies out there that provide evidence of both cognitive and cultural benefits of learning more than one language in addition to your own native language. And we also should agree that world language instruction should be designed to meet the needs of all learners, not just the academically inclined learner. But that it should be interactive and that it should be linked to real life experiences, and it should address the different learning styles and needs of all students, including students who have individual education programs or plans that need to be addressed in the classroom. And we have a question going up.
Is there a reason that world languages couldn't be team taught or has class size considerations for students with IEP, specifically team taught classes and small class sizes? In relationship to co-taught classrooms for students with disabilities, that is a local determination, that is a scheduling issue. There's no reason that that could not happen, however, that is a local decision. In terms of the graduation requirements, it says they have to have employed admissions to college, so this is affect special education.
It does, and there are some universities where it's a requirement for entrance. There are other universities where it's a requirement for exit, for graduation, and there are some majors and universities where there isn't a requirement, so it will vary, but in many cases, yes, students may need it regardless of the type of diploma they get, if their plans are to go on to a post-secondary institution that has a language requirement.
And understand, if a student knows and you're doing their transition planning, they tell you that they want to go to a college that requires foreign language as an admissions requirement, then that should be put into their transition plan.
Okay, so how are we going to go about recognizing what impact this will have in the classroom? Well, obviously, students who come with certain weaknesses can expect to experience those same types of weaknesses in a second language classroom if they are having them in their first language. The extent of which is truly based on the extent that it affects their native language as well. The more severe the disability, the greater the impact it's going to have on the acquisition of a new language. There could be weaknesses among many different systems, including the 4 skill areas, speaking, reading, listening, or writing. And any of these weaknesses should be addressed in that present level of performance and in the goals and in the accommodations that you design for the foreign language classroom or that are translated into the foreign language classroom as written for the general IEP. And as Teresa mentioned, all accommodations required to provide access to the general curriculum must be provided to the students in the foreign language classroom as well.
We have one question asking
Yes.
what PLOP.
Present level of
Present level of academic, present level of performance, and that is the plot, basically the beginning of the IEP. Sorry about that.
Okay, so when we are talking about foreign language standards, since we know that a student's disability will impact them, we do need to make sure that we address what our outcomes are, what our expectations are, and what students are expected to be able to do in the foreign language classroom. So we can take the outcome and address that in terms of the modifications and accommodations that are needed for the student to be successful. Students should be able to develop proficiency in the 4 skill areas, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, as we addressed. And across the 5 Cs, our Virginia Standards of Learning are organized around the national standards, the World Readiness Standards for Language Learning, which include the 5 Cs of communication, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities. And so when you look through our standards, you will see an emphasis on the primary C that language serves its purpose of, and that is communication. And good evening. All right, so our overarching goals in the world language classroom are to develop communication skills with other people in a language other than your native language. And for our purposes here in Virginia, normally that means other than English, although there are certain areas where your native language might not be English, so it's other than your native language. And we do have an expectation that students will improve their understanding and ability in their native language as well as in the second language that they are working towards at that time. We do this through addressing the modes of communication. The modes of communication are the ways that we interact with the language. The first mode that we talk about in our standards is interpersonal communication, what we used to refer to as person-to-person discussions. This first strand focuses on the communication skills that you need to exchange information in the target language with another person. When students are demonstrating skills in this area, they have the ability to initiate, to sustain, to close conversations in an interactive manner, requiring them to be able to not just initiate something, but to listen back to what is the response is and respond to that appropriately. That unknown quantity of what the other person is going to say is what makes it interpersonal communication. So a memorized dialogue where I say, hello, how are you? And I already know in advance that you're going to say, I'm fine, thank you, and you. And I have my response ready to say, fine, also, thank you. That is not an interpersonal communication. That's a presentational mode. Because I already know what's happening, there's no negotiation of meaning. So in order for it to be interpersonal, there has to be some kind of element of waiting for what the other person is going to say before you develop your response back. Okay? An example of interpersonal communication in our world language standards, and this is probably a good time for me to say that I use the term foreign language and world language interchangeably. Right now in our Virginia regulations, we are still classified as foreign language. If that is to change at some point in the future, we'll go to world language on all of our documents, as many of our local school divisions have done. But our regulation right now says foreign. It means for our purposes the same thing, whether I say foreign language or world language. Okay? So one example of a world language standard, and the W1 stands for World Language 1, and this is standard number 2, that the student will sustain brief oral and written exchanges in the target language using familiar phrases and sentences. And that's broken down into 3 parts that you can use to deconstruct what that standard looks like in the classroom. And so your next task in your groups is going to be to take a look at the standard and have a brief discussion, I would say just about maybe just 1 minute, very quickly, and ask yourselves, what accommodations might a student with disabilities need to enable them to adequately reach these targets in this particular standard? Take about a minute and have that discussion, and we'll ask the facilitators to type in some answers that you hear from your groups. So about 1 minute. Okay, so what would a student with disabilities need to have help be able to sustain these brief exchanges, either verbally or in writing?
Sometimes people who are really skilled in organizing note takers obviously get their organization isn't that good, but still thinking on the copy of some of the notes, I said, listen, and then I had to make little crib notes of those notes that, you know, they're not responsible for writing. Sometimes with the audio, they can't do it all at once. So we take away the writing need of it. They're a bit looser.
Do you find it all that they might need extra practice sometimes learning how to speak or hearing the sound and producing it?
A lot of times the sound, the sound part is the best.
I cannot see the screen at all, so I might ask you to read something for me occasionally, if that's okay.
That's just kind of interesting. Stuff.
Yeah.
The majority of the speakers that have are better off.
But so much
Well, it's just asking us to turn off our
Right.
Yeah.
If you could do that,
Yeah.
very simply.
Yes.
Some good discussion going on. Some things have been repeated several times, including the discussion we had here. Some of the graphic organizers I saw mentioned, some of the ways to help students organize themselves and their thoughts, and some good discussions on how we can help students become adequately supported in reaching this particular goal. We're going to take a look at the next strand, and the next mode of communication that we're going to look at is the interpretive mode. Interpretive communication involves listening and reading for understanding. And this second strand consists of the communication skills that are necessary in order to comprehend what you are hearing or seeing or viewing in the target language. And the student's level of communicative competence here is indicated by the degree to which they can interpret those spoken or written messages that are taking place. This is different from that interpersonal communication strand in that it involves a one-way communication. The language is already written or it's being spoken, but I'm not going to interact with it. All I have to do is understand it and interpret what I'm seeing, hearing, or reading. And so we're going to look at one quick example of a standard, again in the level 1 world language, and this is the standard number 3. The student will understand simple spoken and written target language presented through a variety of media and based on familiar topics. This word familiar that you're going to see pop up over and over again is a hallmark of the novice level learner, which is why you see this in the level 1 standards a lot. And so down in the explanations, you'll see words like simple, formulaic, and other terms that are hallmarks of the novice learner. So once again, we're going to take 1 minute and we're going to ask ourselves what accommodations would a student with disabilities need possibly to achieve success in this particular standard. And again, realizing that it's simple messages that they're going to be understanding, and while it might be an authentic message, we're not going to ask them to do a complex task with it. We're going to ask them to maybe recognize things like birth dates or the purpose of an invitation or the main idea of a simple communication. So what support might they need to be able to be successful in that particular standard? And again, take about 1 minute to have that conversation.
I guess 10 years ago, and it was earlier, I mean 20 years ago, really, when it was not as well defined. that was sort of an issue for one night. I mean, I finally got some of them to move into that area, but I was just curious if you feel like that's happening better now. Because, I mean, it seems to me like for a lot of kids, what you do in the high school level's got to set them up to be successful if they're to go to the next level.
Again, some really rich conversations. We're very fortunate on site here to have some post-secondary instructors on site with some discussions about how this might carry over into what happens after high school. So some very good discussions taking place. We're going to take a look at some examples of some accommodations to see if it matches some of the things you put in, because there was a lot of good things put into the chat box, and we'll see if we can find a way to capture and record some of those. But Andrew, if you'll click to the next, we'll go ahead and look at some examples of accommodations that you might have seen. I know I heard some mention of tutoring already, and note takers definitely in the classroom. We talked a bit here about the individualized pace, the extended time options, perhaps even taking coursework and breaking it out over a longer period of time. Some other things that you could possibly look at are options to audit a class first and then take it for credit afterwards. Taking a class under, rather than a point grade system, a pass-fail condition. And some of the other things that you see, but the one thing I really want to stress about the accommodations, and I think Teresa, you can share with me as well, is that many of these are contingent upon local agreement to provide this type of accommodation. So before it gets put into an IEP, before a team decides that this is an accommodation it will offer, there needs to be a discussion as to whether the local school division is able and willing to provide these accommodations, or how is, I'm not having you talk about how this works with the local control over certain options.
Understand, we have to provide access, and if the IEP team determines that this is an appropriate accommodation or modification, the school division, and they agree upon it, then it's up to the school division to provide that. So again, yes, we want to have that discussion, but if it is something that the IEP team agrees upon, then the school division must provide that. So if we went to an IEP meeting, we need to know the policies on being able to take a course pass-fail. And if the IEP team makes that decision, then we would have to follow through with the pass-fail course for that student. So again, that's the reason we say the IEP team getting together, discussing, coming to an agreement on what is an appropriate accommodation for the student. So a lot of times school division will put things in, for example, a one-on-one-A. Johnny really doesn't need a one-on-one-A, but you put it in the IEP, the student is entitled to that one-on-one-A. So again, you think about it, but if the team commits, then it is required.
Okay. So the next level that we want to go to is the difference between accommodations and classroom strategies. Accommodations are put in place in your IEP, but they don't tell you necessarily how to go about delivering the instruction in order for students to be successful. And so that is really where the meat is going to come from. And so we want you to have some conversations next, not about the generic accommodations, but rather some specific strategies. And what, for example, one specific strategy might be extending test time. That's a specific. So the general accommodation might be extended time. Your specific strategy might be to extend the period of time for oral exams to provide a longer wait time period for students before they answer. So you might apply it in that way. So we're going to look at this in terms of what happens in the classroom, and we're going to give you about 5 minutes for this discussion, and we want you to talk together about, in pairs or small groups, what you do or what you could do to increase success on these standards in those modes of communication, that interpersonal mode, the interpretive mode, and the one we didn't talk about, the presentational mode as well. And we want you to think about it in terms of 3 areas. First of all, the general ones, which were very similar to accommodations, but just what's specific in the classroom. But then also, what strategies could you use to help students be more successful in that listening and speaking realm, and then in that reading and writing realm? And so we want you to talk about that, and then we'll go over some examples and see if you come up with the same ones that we do. And I'm going to put 3 minutes for discussion and 2 minutes for processing out your answers. So go ahead and start your discussion around that area. What instructional strategies do you think would be good to use in the classroom with students with disabilities to help them be successful and to build their listening, speaking, reading and writing, and then just their general language skills? Okay, about 3 minutes. And I'm sure you came up with many that were not on this list, because I saw a lot of samples coming through the chat box as we were talking here in our group as well. So I'm sure there's additional ones, and we'll make sure that we correlate those and get them typed up to share. But I do want to take a look at a couple of the questions that came up about general strategies before we look at the specific skill-based strategies in the classroom. And so the first one is actually going to be a question back for our special education colleagues. And there was a question that came up about how do you have an accommodation removed?
Just as IEP teams determines the accommodation, all removals of accommodations have to go through the IEP process. So if you would work with your special ed teacher, and again, foreign language teachers should be working with the student's case manager and be aware of who that person is and have that discussion. And if necessary, they can call an IEP meeting to discuss that accommodation. However, no accommodation can be removed without consent from the parent. So if that parent thinks that that's needed and it is in the IEP, if she does not agree or he does not agree for removal, it will continue to be required in that foreign language class.
And then there was another question in there from our colleagues in Southwestern Virginia, and it was, we have an IEP with an accommodation, read aloud in English. This is one of those areas that highlight the strong necessity to include the world language teacher in the IEP discussion, because that will look like different things there. There is no one answer to this. I wish I could tell you, no, that accommodation can't be put on there for the world language classroom. It doesn't apply to you, because that's not true. You have to have a discussion with the IEP team of how that gets implemented in the world language classroom, and include the parent and the student in that discussion, because it does have to meet alignment with the curricular goals as well. And Teresa, do you want to add any more about the process in an IEP team discussion that might circle around to the requirements of a content that could be in conflict with a specific accommodation?
One of the things that is a discussion that you should have with that IEP team. Describe your content, describe the expectations of your content, and how an accommodation might impact meeting those objectives. So that is a discussion. Again, you have some flexibility. For example, when we're talking about accommodations, you as foreign language teachers have some flexibility in how you assess that meeting that goal, that objective language. So again, that's a negotiation piece. Obviously, if the IEP team says that it has to be done that way, it has to be implemented as designed. So again, I encourage foreign language teachers to be a part of that team, because if it's written into the IEP and if it says read it to them, it has to be read to them.
We're going to take a look at some of your specific strategies now. We're going to start with listening and speaking. And so I saw a lot coming through on here. I think pretty much almost everything I have on mine was in one form or another coming through on the chat box, incorporating different types of teaching methods, including things like TPR and other visual representations of language. Somebody in our group discussed the use of private headphones for listening without distractions to eliminate the background noise. Using language labs and apps where they're available was another discussion that took place. Using a closed script to enable students to guide what they're listening for is another sample of a strategy you might use. Were there any other major ones that came up that anybody see that we didn't address? Okay, predictable structures, yeah, that's another good one. All right, and then we're going to take a quick look at the reading and writing strategies. And again, reduce amounts of vocabulary, chunking it down to smaller pieces. I saw chunks in one of the things coming through. Some charts to assist with translation, reducing the size of the reading passages, breaking them apart where you can, and some of the others that you might be able to come up with, I think we'll gather up and share as well. One last one that I didn't ask you to brainstorm on that we're going to mention just quickly is the use of assistive technology. And this is another item that can be included as part of the IEP process. And we are very fortunate to be in an age right now where technology is getting better and better at being able to meet certain needs that we all had to figure out how to meet by dividing ourselves amongst multiple people and multiple at the same time. And now we can ask software to do some of these things for us. And so we can use things like digital voice recorders to record the prompts so that students can play them back several times if needed. We can use software and apps, things like Duolingo and Tell Me More, or any other that you might have to support what takes place in the classroom. Recording pens are a device that, as you write, records what's taking place so students can not just read it but come back and hear it again as it's been written. And a tool that we found just recently that was highlighted on a website we're going to talk a little bit more about later, Google Tools for special needs. But if you're using Chromebooks or the Chrome browser, a lot of extensions that can really provide some of the accommodations for you. And we'll take a look at what some of those look like. So that's the last of the ones that I wanted to share. And I know you've had some discussions that came up with some other good examples, and we'll incorporate those into our lists as well. Any final thoughts on strategies in the classroom?
I would encourage you, as you're looking at your class as a whole, some of these things work for all students, and it's not difficult to implement them as a whole class for all students. Students working on apps, all students would benefit from that. Students being given a script or that kind of thing to reinforce their learning, it's good for all students. So when you're looking at your class, look at universal design of your class so that you're including all the modalities of learning in your process. And many of those are available to students with disabilities. However, we want to remind you that if it is in the IEP, then you need to be providing that kind of accommodation.
Can I just a thought from having worked in a college level about some of the similar accommodations. You know, if you think a student actually might not need one as much and the student would like to try to do it without it, one thing that sometimes works if you can let them try without a penalty. Because, you know, if you want to have high expectations, sometimes students really do actually want to try to do it and see if they can do it. But if there's a grade penalty, they really don't have the flexibility to do that. And I was able to work with some instructors that were willing to work with some students, and they actually really increased their foreign language ability. And it was also very empowering to them to find that they could do it without certain stuff. And that might be a way to approach them when you feel like an accommodation. I think if you present it to the parents too, and that we'd like to try this, but you have to make sure you do it without a grade penalty, because otherwise it's not fair to them, I think.
And understand, we do want our students to become self-determined.
Yeah.
And one of the things, some of our students will say, I no longer need that. And they will say it at their IEP meeting. They will be there physically to describe what they need. Some of the time you can provide the accommodation and they may refuse, but you need to document that you provided accommodation and say that Johnny said he doesn't want this accommodation. So you need to make sure that if it's in the IEP that you're providing it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the student will be receptive of it.
All good conversation. Before we leave this realm of the general and move into the specific, there is a couple quick questions on here I can answer very quickly. Will the presentation be available after we're done? Yes. And if you want a copy of the PowerPoint itself, you can also get that. Just email one of us and we'll provide that to you as well for use in sharing at your individual locations. And the other question was, Oh, Live Mocha. Live Mocha is just an example of a group online where you can practice your language in using the internet to support the communication. It's just a group there. Okay, so we've looked at some general aspects of special education and the general requirements for our standards of learning for foreign languages, but now we're going to put you to work. And we're going to make you think beyond the general into the realm of the specific and put a face and a description to some of these things that you might be asked to do in the classroom. And so Teresa is going to lead us through a few case studies. And during this case study, when you are in your discussion phase, we're going to incorporate a break in the amount of time we do. So if you need to take a quick run-out break, we're going to do that during the discussion phase of the case study. So feel free to take care of that as you need to. Okay, Teresa.
In relationship to our case studies, basically we have selected about 4 different disability categories and provided you with a description of each of those students and their needs in relationship to accommodations and modifications that they might need in the classroom. And what we want you to do as a pair or as a small group, we want you to pick, we may not have time to do all 4, so pick 2 of the 4 case studies, and I think we posted these on the site, so they are available to you. There's 3 things that you would want to know about this student. So as a group, list 3 things that you would want to know that is not available in this case study. List 2 concerns that you might have, and then list 1 individual you can talk to within your school to address that concern. So again, we're going to give you time. We're going to give you about 10 minutes. Let's give you a total of 12 minutes to do 2 of the 4 case studies. We don't care which one you choose as a group, and you can build some break time in, and then we will get back together to discuss.
Okay, so we're going to mute the mic on our end. Studies now, and we'll see you in 12 minutes. All right, 12 minutes flies by. It's time to come back together.
All right, we're ready to process out on these, and we're going to have a little discussion, and we thank you for putting information in. We want the folk who have done case study 1, who is David, to make sure that we can see your answers. And I have our specialist here. I'm putting her in a tight spot. She's going to process out and think and share a little bit about David and some of the things that we might do for David and might need to know, and who we would contact in order to get some assistance.
Hi. So in regard to David, I am wondering what his participation looks in terms of some of the interpersonal and the other interpretive activities, how that looks for him. I'm looking at, I'm also wondering what his attendance, what some of the issue is there with his attendance since he's missed. And that's a concern that I have, and something I want to know more about. In terms of, and one individual that I would really like to talk to more is the assistive technology, the person providing some assistive technology along with the case manager. But basically I want to know what his participation looks like in class and the extent to that he's performing. I'd also like to know in terms of his performance exactly what that looks like on formative and summative assessments and how maybe we're doing some of that. Anybody else have anything to add about David?
I would say, would he be able to participate through, like we talked about FaceTime or Skype or something? When he's not at school, can he still hear and speak it and have us hear it?
Yeah, I was wondering if he had internet at home. So
whatever that
he
is.
could make use of
Because
other websites.
Another thing I was thinking, does he have a friend, a close friend or a family member at the school who can be kind of a, help you be a liaison when he doesn't get to school? Do you have someone who's going to see him after school that can be like a carrier of stuff?
Work calendar has something.
Yes, it appears that some of the same conversations that we were having here, you guys were having in the field. You wanted to know who's involved with him as it relates to the attendance concerns. What are his post-secondary goals? And that's always an important question. Some of you talked about, is there an instructional assistant that can be in the classroom and then assigned to him? The software, the computer, the internet, all of those were issues. You also talked about, who's his caseworker, what's going on at home. So those are some of the questions that you would be asking. And as great teachers, you would be looking at this when a student is not attending your class on a regular basis. They should be there. Don't let him be out of the class 20 days and say, oh, he hasn't been here, and then he's failing. So again, those interventions would be important. Case study 2, Sue. I have someone here from Dotney to talk a little bit about Sue.
And same thing, if any of you have processed case study number 2, if you would go ahead and type into the chat box some of the discussion we had around Sue.
I wanted to know if she read in Braille, and could we get our textbook in Braille? And could we have someone take notes for her? They would have to be larger print, apparently. And as far as someone that I could talk to within the school, I have one really special teacher that I feel like I could reach out to, and she could help me more with what I might do to help this student.
Awesome. Those are very good questions. Does the student use Braille? Does he have a Braille reader and a writer? Does he have access to the textbooks in Braille? All of those things should be addressed in his IEP, and I would assume that probably if he needs a textbook and it needs to be in Braille, that's a request that can be made, and he should have a Braille textbook. You talked about working with the vision impaired teacher and making sure that she's aware and that you have the next necessary supports. Also looking at how does he function in other classrooms? Where do we need to seat him? Those kind of things would be things that I would be asking. I would be looking at his other strengths. What are his strengths areas? How can I make sure that I remember not to just put everything up in written format and make sure that I'm doing the auditory too. So again, those are good comments. I'm seeing some of the similar comments from you folk in the field. Thank you very much. When you have a student with a vision impairment, it will be very important to understand and talk with the vision impaired teacher and other supports within the school.
I see somebody in the field also mentioned the safety issue, which needs to be addressed, of course, in the classroom anytime you are talking about a student who might have a mobility issue.
That is exactly right. You would want to make sure that your classroom setup and your classroom design is set up so a way that he's not going to run into things or fall over things. You're going to have a designated place for him. So I'm looking at how you design the classroom. All right, case study 3, John.
And same roles again, those of you who processed out around case study 3, please go ahead and type your remarks into the chat box.
Okay, well, the first thing I thought was if he's twice defined as exceptional, how is he exceptional and how does he best learn? Is he an audio learner? Is he a visual learner? How does he understand things best? I think you try and do things in your class that play to his strengths and just feel isolated. Does he have his own laptop or his own a device through which he can keep notes or where he does work on to see he has something special he can use? Concerns I'd have, does he communicate well with others? Does he feel threatened in rooms? Where is he on this spectrum here? What are his anxieties, or does he have any? Or if he's high performing, maybe that's not just you. We'll need to find out what his comfort zones are. And just a way to how we can keep track of, it might be sometimes it tends to be organization and remembering things, and does he have a system? How can we help him get a system going on? And the people I would try to talk to him would be either his SPED contact or the counselor, his case manager, also probably other teachers who've had him in the regular, like an English teacher. What are they doing in her classes or his classes that I can also do?
Awesome. And understand with twice exceptional learners, that means that this student has a disability and he is also gifted. So you are looking at two areas for these students, and the discussion, what are the kinds of things that impact him with his disability, but also what are the things that he needs because he's also gifted. So you have a very interesting student, and we have a lot of students with autism that are falling within this category of twice exceptional students. So again, I would also be talking with the gifted coordinators, or the gifted teacher within that building, as well as the special education teacher, because you're looking at two areas in which we have to address. So we have to address his giftedness, but we also have to address his disability. And some of the things that I would be concerned with would be, how does he interact? How does he socially interact with his peers? Would he rather be alone and work independently by himself? What kind of things do I need to have in place to address any behavioral concerns with the student? Again, how can I enrich he may get this really quick. How do I enrich it? So those are the kind of things that I would be concerned about.
Saw some of those same questions that you just mentioned come up from Woodbridge, up just a little higher, Manassas Woodbridge had the same question about the social interaction. I see some others.
What are his greatest strengths? We really want to build on these students' strengths. How does he react to transitions? That is very important. Sometimes when the fire drill bell goes off, how is he going to react? Is he a student that will not want to leave the building? What do we need to put in place to get him out of the building? How do we prepare him? A repetition, making sure he likes things done the same way. So having that schedule. This is what we do when we come into the classroom. So these are some of the things that you would have to consider for a student with autism, and also in relationship to these twice exceptionality.
Now, just before we leave this one, because it's an interesting case study, for those who aren't familiar with Asperger's, how would you describe what the needs of a student with Asperger's might be?
In relationship to that, their needs may vary because some of them are very socially awkward. It's a communication disorder. It's a more social pragmatic disorder. You might say to him, jump off the building. He's going to take that very generally. He might try to do that. And one of the things I used to teach my students when I had students with autism in my classroom, you need to understand how he interacts with the language and communication. So a lot of literal interpretations of rules and procedures. So again, we have, and one of the things that we need to let you know, that on our website we have guidance documents on each of the different disability categories. If you have students with specific learning disability, there's a guidance document for that. If you have students with autism, there's a guidance document for that. So again, pulling those resources, visually impaired, sensory disabilities, so there are supports out there. Characteristics of disabilities vary. This student with Asperger's may look this way, but another one may look totally different. So I think there's some similarities, but again, it's an individual student with individual needs. Okay. All right, case study 4, Kim.
Same rules, you know what to do.
So, well, first of all, I would like to know how exactly the medication affects her. It's like ADHD, or how, what is exactly affecting her in the meaning of, yeah, he has problems to focus and to study, but how exactly it's problem from understanding reading, it's problems to attend class, to assist in class, and what about similar cases? Because I don't know anything about epilepsy. How does it affect the students who take medication? epilepsy. And what about her learning strategies? If she's using the correct ones, if she knows how to improve her studying skills, and how can we help that? My concern is if we can accommodate her in class, giving her more time, for example, to taking the test or submit or for example the assignments. And some individual that can talk, probably the psychologist will give me the first idea of what's idea perhaps how this affects to learning.
Very good. In terms of epilepsy, and you may have a student with other health impairment. Other health impairment is based on a diagnosis of a medical condition. So you would be wanting to know, I would want to talk with the nurse along with, does she have seizures? How often does she have it? What do we do in the classroom when this happens? Are they strong? Are they just, mild seizures? What should I do in those cases? And how does this impact her in terms of the length of an assignment, completing the assignment, maybe needing to give extra time for her to complete assignments? So those kind of things. I definitely would have the nurse and her case manager as a person that I would be consulting with this particular student.
Okay. Let's see what they say out in the field. Start from the top of this. I saw some coming in from different locations.
I thought about even if you have a line talking to her tutor, at least, how is the tutor any good? Did no German, talk to the tutor.
Well, if the tutor, we could also set up a communication
Sure.
where you email the tutor
Sure.
assignments and work very hand in hand could work, but yeah, that could be a problem if the language wasn't that strong, but if the tutor was strong, you could make a relationship and give them access to stuff.
And most of these students, I think Arlington mentioned a medical plan. Most of these students with the health impairments have a medical plan in place in their buildings also. So
It's very important when you have a student with a medical condition. I think that question from Arlington highlights is that you really need to know what to do before anything else. What do you do if an emergency arises for this particular student? What is the quick, appropriate reaction to take place? I think they brought to light a very important part that's, I'm glad you put that in there. A lot of other questions came up. There's a lot of discussion on Kim as you scroll down through the comments. It looked like there was a lot of folks who had some good discussion around how to serve the needs for a student who might have disabilities in this category.
exactly, and again, this is probably one of the autism and other health impairment categories are the ones that are growing at the fastest rate. We have more students, about 13% of our students with disabilities in the state of Virginia have autism, and about 20% of them have other health impairment. About 42% of our students have specific learning disabilities. So in terms of when we look at our disability categories, about 42% of all students with disabilities are students with specific learning disabilities. But autism is growing at the fastest rate. So you're going to be seeing more students with autism in your classrooms.
Andrew is working on that sound problem. We do apologize for those of you who are having problems with the sound. We'll get that back up as quickly as we can. In the meantime, we saw a question coming through and they're asking, Teresa, where can these guidance documents be found? Can you give a little more specific on the web location?
If you go to the Virginia Department of Ed website, and on the left-hand side, go down to, scroll down to special education, click on special education. Once you get to special education page, on the right-hand side, you will see information for parents, and then you will see specific disabilities. Click on specific disabilities, and there will be a section for each disability category. And once you get to those individual pages, you will find guidance and materials and support there for students with those particular disabilities. Yes, I think it is in our guidance document.
Right. Well, and that's actually a pretty good question to lead us into our final section for today's workshop. And that is, if you remember on our agenda, we had one more topic we wanted to cover this afternoon. We wanted to talk about a general overview of special education and how special education disabilities can be met in the foreign language classroom in that interaction. But then we also wanted to talk with you a little bit about what specific support we can provide from the Virginia Department of Education to the field for those of you who are working to support foreign language learning for students with disabilities. And we are very happy to announce to you that we have just finished creating a guidance document that will provide a lot of the information that we have talked about tonight, as well as a lot more additional information that will be available for you. It's going to look something like this. You can see that coming out there. The cover may change a little bit with the cover art because we're still working out the final tweaks, but we're going through our final draft process right now to get this posted. And we're going to show you a little bit about what is in this document. Just before I show you what's in it, let's talk a little bit about the process we used to get to this point. Teresa, why don't you share, just to get us started, a little bit about bringing the work group together and why we decided to create this document.
One question that we often get at the department, we get a lot of parent concerns about their students with disabilities in the foreign language classrooms. We get a lot of parent calls. As a result of parents calling, we have some great students out there that could not get the advanced diplomas and were wanting to go to universities that were requiring foreign languages. So based on the input from parents, we decided to put together the work group. And again, as we talked about earlier, we had a group of folk with diverse backgrounds coming together. And we looked at the barriers, and one of the barriers that they recommended was there were limited resources to assist teachers in understanding students with disabilities in a foreign language classroom. So as a result of that, we decided that our first step would be to provide and develop a guidance document. We hired an outside consultant to come work with Lisa and I in terms of developing this guidance document. Our consultant was Katie Arnett, and she's a professor who teaches in Baltimore. And as a result, she also has a book that she has developed, Language for All. And based on her book, we were able to consult with her, and she helped us to put together this guidance document. So after about, again, 6 months to a year now, we are finally at the end of the process. Any guidance document that we develop at the Department of Ed has to go through layers of approval processes before we can release it. So we have just gotten the final signatures, and we are doing the final review and edits of the document. So hopefully our goal is to have it ready and available in the next maybe few weeks to a month on our website.
And some of the exciting things that we hope you're going to see in here, Andrew, if you can just go back up to the main organizer for me real quickly. This is sort of the structure of what we're looking at in the document. And we do want to stress right off, this is by no means an all-inclusive document, but rather this is a starting point for us as practitioners to learn more about meeting the needs of students with disabilities in the foreign language classroom. The opening sections of this document, we want to warn you about this now because this is some of the feedback we got on it. The opening sections read a bit like a textbook, and we understand that. But we decided to leave that in anyway because we wanted that background information in there for those who want to maybe hold some faculty discussions around it, who maybe want to do some professional learning communities within your schools or your departments around it, or who just want to be able to read more about it on your own and get a good grounding before you go into the implementation part. So there's a practical side to the document and there's a theoretical side to the document. And we solicited a lot of feedback, and we did get some feedback saying that the first part, really kind of reads like a textbook. And we understand that, but we decided to leave it in. And in that first opening section, there's a lot of good information that we hope you will actually take and read, and then discuss and have conversations about. And within the introduction, we talk about the purpose for the document, but we also talk about the vision and some of the policies and the rationale for the inclusion of foreign language for all students. And we also share some of the research provided mainly by Dr. Arnett and based on the information from her book and the extensive research that she has done on second language acquisition for students with learning disabilities and other disabilities. And then we also talk a bit about the specifics of how to go forth and implement these things in your classroom. So once you get past that opening section, don't be daunted, because inside there's a lot of good stuff. So let's take a look at some of the things that you might see. We're going to give you a little quick example of what you might see in each section. So the first one that we pulled out, here's an example of linking research. And so the question that was asked are students with disabilities, and this is not a category, by the way, this is just an acronym for purpose of space on a PowerPoint presentation. SWD just means students with disabilities, and it's just an acronym for writing purposes. Are students with disabilities capable of developing skills in additional languages? And so we talk about some of the research for that, and some of the research that Dr. Arnett links to talks about that it's a fairly small area of research at the moment, but up to this date that there's no evidence that an individual with a language-based disability or another type of disability is not capable of developing skills in an additional language. That they learn the first language, they can learn the second language, and the research has not confirmed that there's any reason why students with disabilities cannot continue to perform. And so we discussed that piece of the research along with some other research areas in the book as well. And so that's one area. The next area that we look at is a policy and procedure. And Teresa, do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the policy that we highlight here?
What is FAPE? And that is free and appropriate public education. And that is from the Virginia regulations governing students with disabilities. And even though our regulations do not address foreign language as such, it addresses FAPE, students having access to a free and appropriate public education. So we talk about how we must provide FAPE and how foreign language classes should be and are required to be available to students with disabilities. So then again, we look at how we might be able to provide those services in a general classroom setting. So we want to give them access. So we talk about those policies and your requirement, our requirement as school officials and teachers to provide a free and appropriate public education.
Okay. Next. And finally, one of the sections we want to highlight is the meat of the document, the actual practical application piece. What are some of the strategies and best practices that you can use in the classroom? And so one of the strategies highlighted in the document is the concept of multiple means of expression. And we talk in the document not only about what that is, not only we give a definition of it, and talk about the fact that it is one of the three primary tenets of universal design for learning that you mentioned earlier, and that it talks about what it looks like in the classroom. And we give an example page of sort of one-page pullout that you can look at and see it from an overview. And so if we look at the next slide, you'll see this is what the sample page in the document will look like. It includes, of course, the title and description of the strategy that we are discussing. It also talks about what language skill is supported by using this strategy. We give a rationale for why to use it, but we also give a few cautions because, as you probably know, any strategy that is not applied appropriately won't provide the benefit that you're looking for. So we do provide some cautions to think about when you are using the strategy, and then we give you some tips for applying it and some sample activities that embed the strategy within it. There are a number of these examples in the document, and so the multiple means of expression one is one of the samples that you'll see, as well as some others, including some that you probably are familiar with and some that might be new to you as well. Okay, so those are the big sections of the document. And then we have a few follow-up pieces which you can also use hopefully when you are starting up your discussions. Tips, right? And we have tips for many different groups. And we're going to start with the language teachers. And so if you look, see on the screen right now, these are some of the tips that we have for language teachers. And special education teachers, we didn't leave you out. We have some for you and other groups as well. But we're starting with the language teachers primarily because the reason we put this together was to build that knowledge base for them. And so the first tip that we have is the one that I want to highlight the most, and that is get involved. When you have students with disabilities, and perhaps even before you get students with disabilities, find out who the child study team is or the IEP team leaders at your school, and make sure that they know you want to be involved whenever there's a student who will be coming to your classroom who will have IEP decisions made that might affect the work that takes place in the room. And when you get invited to attend those meetings, go to the IEP meetings and listen and learn and share, and make sure that you're part of the conversation, as well as just receiving the results that come out of the team. Okay. Look at your curriculum with an eye that takes into account that not every student is going to learn the same way, that you might have a student with special needs that you will have to provide accommodations for. And so look at your curriculum and ask yourself questions about the curriculum and how you can be sure that the student has not only access, but has the opportunity to be successful in the goals that you're setting in. Your special education support staff. And then also look to see where you can find resources outside your classrooms. We have another whole page of language tips for teachers that I'm not going to go through, but these are all going to be in the document that you'll be able to access, and on the PowerPoint that you'll have access to as well. Okay? After the tips for language teachers, we go on to tips for special education teachers. And we've included a lot of generic ones, and again, please know these are by no means all-inclusive. These are a starting point. They're an area for you to have discussions with your colleagues, as well as for you to add to. And when you come across ones that really work in your school, Teresa and I hope that you will share them with us, because this is a living document and we want to add to it. We want to include best practices from the field that have been shown to be successful. So we hope that you will send in ones to share for us. And so Teresa, do you want to just share a few of the tips for the special educators?
Yes, in relationship to special education teachers, we encourage you to have a conversation with the foreign language teachers. We encourage you to make sure that you're inviting them. When you're looking at transition goals and transitional planning for students with disabilities, you need to make sure that you're involving this language teachers, if foreign languages is one of their, there should be an open dialogue. I should know who you are, and I should be able to come and talk to you whenever necessary. Ask the foreign language teachers about the appropriate language learning resources to be used in the resource classroom. If you are providing additional assistance for the student, it is okay for you guys to decide what that is going to look like. Many of our students may have a study skills class or something like that, and you're providing additional assistance. It's important that the foreign language teacher and the special ed teacher work together because of the special ed teacher's lack of knowledge of the language itself. So those are some of the tips that we would suggest. There are some more on additional pages within your document. We also had tips for administrators, and again, we did not put that up, but we have some suggestions for administrators and counselors and how they're looking at our students with disabilities. Okay.
And finally, we have some resource sections to the document. Some that are specifically called resources, and I have a few examples of the resources that you'll see listed. For example, some research that's out there. One whole volume of a publication called the Foreign Language Annals, and if you're a foreign language teacher and a member of ACTFL, you're probably familiar with this publication. But one in 2009, an entire edition was dedicated to specifically focus on students with learning disabilities and foreign language learning. And that's a great resource to go back if you're a member of ACTFL to be able to access. We also put in that list of Google tools that I mentioned earlier that we came across. And in that list, there are tools that can be used as add-ons if you use Chromebooks or a Chrome browser to help students in the categories of text-to-speech and readability, read comprehension, focus, navigation, and different types of accommodations that might be needed. So those are listed on that page. And then there are a list of other resources as well that you will find, including some other publications, some links to some blog sites, some projects that take place. One here in Virginia, Project Link out of Longwood University, is mentioned on there as well. So that's all included in the resource section. And again, we ask you to share with us those items that might make this even more rich and beneficial by adding to it when you find other resources that are really beneficial. There are also several appendices, and in the appendices we provide a full glossary of world language related terms and special education related terms specific to those two categories. Of course, there are terms that are useful in other places, but we divided them up that way just so if you're looking specifically, if you're a special educator and you want to know what a foreign language teacher means when they say authentic, it has a specific meaning in the foreign language world. So you can find that there and you can read about it. And if you are a foreign language teacher and you want to know what a special educator is talking about when they say specially designed instruction, you can go to that glossary and get that information there. So that's one of the appendices. There's also several other appendices that include information that will help you answer some frequently asked questions. So we took ones that we thought would be FAQs, drew from some other guidance documents, and put those answers into the appendices as well. So this document, we hope, is going to be a valuable resource for you. I saw some questions coming up about where you can get it, and we're going to cover that right here in this final slide section coming up. What are the next steps for this document? How do you get your hands on it, and when will you have access to it? So right now, this is going through its final editing. We are getting ready to talk with the webmaster about getting it posted. Once it is available online, we will send out a superintendent's memo. If you're not familiar with what they are, they come out every week. They're posted on the Virginia Department of Education website. Anybody can access them, although they're addressed specifically to school division superintendents, telling you that the document is available, where the link is that you can access it, and also any other information about it. We are also going to link to the document on our respective web pages. So within the foreign language web page on the Virginia Department of Education site, there will be a link to it. We haven't talked with the webmaster yet to see what it will look like exactly, but it will be at the minimum available as a PDF document to you. It will also be available as a, how do you describe it, text accessible document. So we're going to take away all the formatting and put it in just a text format so that it's accessible for easy reading, and perhaps some link to the pieces through other courses as well, but we'll know more about that once we talk to the webmaster. Once you get it, and once you have completed this particular workshop, our hope is that you will then go back to your respective schools, school divisions, central offices, or wherever your workplaces might be, and start putting the theory into practice. First, by sharing with others what you have learned, and find a colleague. If you are a special educator, find the world language colleague that is in your school, and vice versa. If you're a world language colleague, find a special educator who might be helping students that will be in your classes, and start talking and start sharing. And the same with your administrators and your guidance counselors. And then start seeing what you can implement. Start looking for some of the best practices and strategies. Pick one and start in your classroom and say, you know what, I'm going to work on multiple means of expression, and I'm going to use that strategy in my classroom. And then start giving us some feedback and evaluation on the document, on the presentation, on the information, on anything else that we need to know to make this better, because it's not for us that we made this, it's for you. And we want it to be not only a useful document, but a valuable resource and a place that you can go to get information and help, so that we can provide opportunities for all of our students, and all means all. Students with disabilities should have access and opportunities for success in the world language classroom.
Also, if you have not already signed up for Teacher Direct, you can go on our website and sign up for Teacher Direct, which will notify you of any professional development opportunities that we might be doing in the near future in relationship to foreign language. It will also link you to the superintendent's memo. These Teacher Direct notifications come out every week, and it will give you the information, and you will know that it's available to teachers if you do not go to our homepage, because it's an automatic email to you with anything that's coming up in the department. So again, we appreciate you working with us to help make foreign language accessible to students with disabilities. I believe it's a great opportunity for them, and we are encouraging you to look at your students, get to know your students, know who is in your classroom and what their disabilities are, and get the special ed teachers in tune to help you better address their needs. Thank you.
Should we have any final questions? Anything come up in the chat box, Andrew, as a final question? Okay. So that's pretty much the extent of what we have for you this afternoon, this evening. We hope you have a safe travel back to your homes, that you find the information of value, and please, we do mean that we want your feedback. We want to know how to make this better. And so we want to say thank you. We want to say thank you to our host here at Washington Lee University. Can you click to the next slide? And we want to say thank you to all of our host site coordinators, especially for setting up the sites, for facilitating the conversations, for helping to make sure that the workshop was available to as many places and as many teachers as possible. We also want to mention that if you have colleagues who were not able to attend this particular session, and they are in this southwestern Virginia area, we will be doing an on-site, in-person workshop at Abingdon on November 7th, and that is open to anybody who wants to come. It is free and open, but it is going to be in southwestern Virginia, so please encourage your colleagues to come as a pair with a special education partner or a world language partner so that we can do the activities together. If you have questions specifically for Teresa or I, last slide, Andrew, and you want to contact us, you please feel free to write to us via email at our Department of Education addresses. They're up on the screen. We'll leave them there for a moment so that you can jot them down if you want them. We are both open to questions. You can email me anytime. I also have a newsletter that comes out once a month. If you want to sign up for it, you're welcome to sign up. There's a link on the newsletter that you fill out your email address and can get it. But that's, I think, the end of what we have for tonight. Again, thank you very much. We enjoyed having you. Have a great night.